should never become business as usual. This training is going to focus on steps we can take to address the abuse of our brothers and sisters and to hold those accountable who fail to treat us with the dignity and respect that we deserve. So I think we can all agree that letter carriers face a great deal of stress in the workplace. Now, on this next slide, I want to talk to you about this survey that we had in 2023. So in 2022, we had 47 USPS-related suicides. In 2023, that jumped to 201, more than a 4-time increase in the number of suicides among postal employees. Is this directly related to our working environment? I mean, that's difficult to prove, but it's my opinion and the opinion of our brothers and sisters here that disrespect, intimidation, and bullying are on the rise on our workroom floors, and I think you're all going to agree with that. Now, I'm sure most stewards have heard of the joint statement on violence and behavior in the workplace. This agreement was reached after the Royal Oaks tragedy on November 14th, 1991, where a letter carrier killed 4 and wounded 5 before taking his own life. I believe, in order to understand the joint statement, it's important to talk a little bit about the events that led up to this tragedy. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read the joint statement to you. I hope I can have your patience with this. It's not very long, but we talk about it a lot, but we don't really look at the words. So I'm going to talk about this. I'm going to read it to you, and then we'll talk a little bit about the background of how it came to be. We all grieve for the Royal Oak victims, and we sympathize with their families, as we have grieved and sympathized all too often before in similar horrifying circumstances. But grief and sympathy are not enough. Neither are ritualistic expressions of grave concern or the initiation of investigation, studies, or research projects. The United States Postal Service, as an institution, and all of us who serve that institution, must firmly and unequivocally commit to do everything within our power to prevent further incidents of work-related violence. This is a time for candid appraisal of our flaws and not a time for scapegoating, finger-pointing, or procrastination. It is a time for reaffirming the basic right of all employees to a safe and humane working environment. It is also the time to take action to show that we mean what we say. We openly acknowledge that in some places or units there is an unacceptable level of stress in the workplace, that there is no excuse for and will be no tolerance of violence or any threats of violence by anyone at any level of the Postal Service, and that there is no excuse for and will be no tolerance of harassment, intimidation, threats, or bullying by anyone. We also affirm that every employee at every level of the Postal Service should be treated at all times with dignity, respect, and fairness. The need for the USPS to serve the public efficiently and productively, and the need for all employees to be committed to giving a fair day's work for a fair day's pay does not justify actions that are abusive or intolerant. Making the numbers is not an excuse for the abuse of anyone. Those who do not treat others with dignity and respect will not be rewarded or promoted, and those whose unacceptable behavior continues will be removed from their positions. We obviously cannot ensure that however seriously intentioned our words may be, they will not be treated with winks and nods or skepticism by some of our over 700,000 employees. But let there be no mistake that we mean what we say, and we will enforce our commitment to a workplace where dignity, respect, and fairness are basic human rights, and where those who do not respect those rights are not tolerated. And then they have a list of signatures here, and it says, our intention is to make the workroom floor a safer, more harmonious, as well as a more productive workplace. We pledge our efforts to these objectives. So one quick note, if we look at the bottom of the JSOV, there's a signature missing. The APWU did not sign or agree with the joint statement language for fear that it would be used to target craft employees and could not be enforced to correct the behavior of management. And they were right to a degree. The NALC had to fight hard to get this clarified and was finally able to do this through a national arbitration award that Corey's going to talk about in just a minute. On our next slide, first we need to recognize that as union representatives, we need to dispel the idea that a little harassment is okay. We can never understand what hardships a fellow brother or sister carries with them every single day, and we should not trivialize their pain. The Royal Oaks tragedy, of course, had some backstory, but the final straw, and this is interesting because a lot of people don't know this, the final straw for this letter carrier was when he was placed on a 16-7 emergency suspension without pay for the simple act of turning in a late 3996 request for auxiliary assistance. This carrier wasn't the only one in the office turning in a late 3996, but he was the one being targeted by management. So he was the one suspended and sent home without pay. So of course, this discipline was unwarranted, brothers and sisters. The turning in of a late request for overtime or assistance, standing by itself, does not make any employee a threat to himself or others. It doesn't pose a threat to the loss of postal funds or property. This was an attempt to bully and harass, period. Now, following this suspension, Postal Management contacted this carrier at his home. While he was on the phone, they asked the operator to interrupt the call that he was on. So the carrier became angry. He used vulgar language at the supervisor, believing that since he was off the clock, he could do so. And he was placed into this led to a removal action. So they added the vulgar language to his emergency suspension and claimed that he was now a threat to the workplace as well. So obviously, brothers and sisters, we're not condoning what followed, but we need to look at what both parties acknowledge to be a pattern of harassment. Now let's go over some examples of what might qualify as harassment, some of the provisions that we can cite. Workplace harassment violations can be broken down into two general categories: threats of violence and harassment, intimidation and bullying, and nonviolent threats. And we also have a third category on this next slide here. It's the gray areas. Gray areas that fall under harassment, but they could be subjective and they need more evidence to support them. Now, of course, it's easy to recognize that direct physical threats or physical violence are JSOV violations. But these other forms of harassment are not always as easy to spot. For instance, management has a right to relay their expectations to us, but where does that become harassment? Where's the line that's crossed? Let's go through a list of some examples. On our next slide, some of the examples of harassment, I'm not going to go through all of these because we have a really long list here, but profanity, physical gestures and insults, displays of carrier performance on bulletin boards with TV screens. Corey, you and I have seen this pop up all over the country, haven't we, brother?
Yeah, that's one of the things that we always target is whiteboards that talk about maintaining a mutual respect atmosphere. That goes along with 115.4. I know we'll talk about that in just a second, but that is definitely one of the things that we'll raise as far as harassment to our brothers and sisters is when you got the TV screens, you got the whiteboards, and they decide they're going to take Paul Bolanger and put his performance up against everybody else. They may mark it in red, I mean, that's deficient. Those are things that we'll target as far as coming after our brothers and sisters, making an unharmonious working environment for us.
Yeah, and absolutely. And, this is just a little side note here, but this became an epidemic in our workplace, and this should have been attacked the very first time it happened. But we're going to talk about ways that we're going to do that following this presentation. There's also a good arbitration that Corey's going to talk about from Arbitrator Clark that deals with this too. So we're going to talk about that in a minute. Another example, unreasonable confrontations on basically just about anything at all. As we said, management has the right to relay their expectations one time and respectfully. That's it. Any further intimidation to meet their number. We just talked about television monitors, Corey and I, about singling out carrier performance in front of peers. but also daily leave times posted on carrier cases, despite our contractual right to assess our own workload. That's a JSOV violation. When we're instructed that we're limited to 1 hour of office time or 22 minutes of vehicle load time, 20 minutes of fixed office time, even though our contract outlines no such standards, and carriers are being held to 1-day counts or street evaluations. Street evaluations conducted in summer that they're trying to hold us to this daily performance marker. The auto pivot program is another one that just rolled out by management, provides further opportunity to assign additional work to a letter carrier without their input. If they say they can't complete the work in 8 hours, they're told that computer projections are calling them liars. The first arbitration site we've got on this slide is from Arbitrator Clark. We just talked about this. It's regarding posting daily expectations at carrier cases every morning. This is a good decision because the arbitrator found a violation of Article 14 and the joint statement. And just for a reference, you're going to have these sites at the end of this presentation, so you can write them down if you'd like, but we're going to provide them for you. The second site on this page is a lot more recent. This is from an arbitrator, Arbitrator Samarco, from just a few months ago. In this one, she discusses where management threatened to do 3999s in discipline if carriers did not make their DOAS numbers. And this was deemed to constitute harassment as well. Very recent case. When unreasonable projected workloads are argued by management, we have additional memorandums. We have step 4 decisions that can find their way into our case file, but that's going to be on another day's training. It's another project. Brothers and sisters, our stewards get passionate, and rightfully so, in their defense of carriers who are bullied and harassed at work. But we must keep our eye on the focus of a proper grievance preparation. When we address harassment claims against letter carriers, there are a number of contractual provisions and arbitration sites that we should include, and we're going to be providing those at the conclusion of this training. Now, aside from the JSOV, which is M1242 in the Material Reference System, we should always look to point out that this document is also in the JCAM, which creates a further agreement of acceptance and compliance by the parties. There's a second JSOV document that a lot of people don't reference. It's M1243. This document reaffirms the commitment of the parties to work together to implement the JSOV. And we should also include the Royal Oaks ARB decision, which is C11344, in our grievance to show that verbal abuse and baseless discipline are grounds for a JSOV charge. Arbitrators need to understand that contrary to management's arguments, the JSOV is not just for flagrant violations of physical threats, it's for bullying, harassment, intimidation. Our next slide, we should also include in any harassment grievance the Postal Service policy statement on workplace harassment. Now, this is basically the Postal Service reaffirming their commitment to the joint statement. And as a side note, this is a policy statement, not a memorandum between the parties. So normally we wouldn't cite this in our issue statement because policy statements can't be enforced by the union because they're simply internal documents. But in this case, it mirrors and cites other documents that are actually citable. So we're going to include it to argue that this shows the Postal Service's commitment to the JSOV. Now, next slide. Before we go any further, we need to emphasize the importance of including Article 19 in the JSOV issue statement. Article 19, for all stewards who know, is the bridge that allows handbooks and manuals to be incorporated into our collective bargaining grievance rights if the provisions affect wages, hours, or working conditions of our carriers. So, in a grievance, not citing Article 19 should be the exception to the rule. We should almost always have this in our grievance, and especially so when we're citing a JSOV violation. Now, next slide. While we're discussing articles of the national agreement, let's get them all out of the way at once. Article 3 and Article 5 both restrict management to perform their duties in accordance with applicable laws. And Article 3 also states that, and I'm quoting here, while postal management has the right to manage the Postal Service, it must act in accordance with applicable laws, contract provisions, arbitration awards, letters of agreement, and memoranda. And a steward should point out in their arguments that the JSOV must be adhered to, or there's a clear violation of Article 3. On next slide, Article 14 is a very important argument for us to make. Article 14.1 states it is the responsibility of management to provide safe working conditions in all present and future installations and to develop a safe working force. In Article 14.2, the employer and the union insist on the observance of safe rules and safe procedures by employees and insist on correction of unsafe conditions, and the workplace must be maintained in a safe and sanitary condition. So there's a few reasons that we include Article 14. I mean, first, of course, it's going to be our argument that we deserve to be free of abusive behavior as a basic safety requirement. The joint statement has established that the behavior listed, including bullying and intimidation, can lead to an unsafe condition. Now, this becomes even more important when the abusive actions of management have continued on multiple occasions when they could have been corrected. Article 14 is also important because it triggers an expedited grievance procedure. So Article 15, which is also always going to be cited in our grievance, provides that for safety-related grievances, the union may file a grievance immediately at the formal A step of the grievance procedure. This is important to provide relief and remedy to our carriers as soon as possible, because we don't want an aggressive supervisor to have the opportunity to continue their behavior. We want to stop it in their tracks. There's an arbitration decision, there's a few of them actually, supporting Article 14 violations, and we're going to talk about those in a minute as well. But for now, I'm going to hand this to somebody who needs no introduction, Mr. Corey Walton.
Hi, Paul. How you doing, brother?
Hey, Corey, doing great. Thank you for
You did
subbing
really
in.
good. You did really good right there.
Oh, thank you. I hope you do as well.
We'll see. I'm gonna talk just a little bit before I get started, but you work 6 days a week in all kind of weather. You get one day off, and you got over 150 people that have shown up on a Sunday on their day off to educate themselves, and that's a level of commitment that we're looking for. That's special,
It sure is.
because we talk about educating. I know James Henry, his main thing is educating. He wants his members educated. He wants light blue educated. You look at the CLC, you've done LMOU training, you've done 6-day count training, and now you got JSOV training. But this is just something that you're going to experience when James Henry takes over next year. That's why Paul Bolanger has been assigned the responsibility of Director of Education, is because that's going to be something that James Henry puts an emphasis on. Nobody else is putting an emphasis on education, and that's a shame, because I've always said an educated workforce is a devastating thing. I'm not just talking about educated shop stewards, formulaes, whatever. I'm talking about an educated workforce. And that's what James Henry wants, is an educated workforce. Hence why we're here on a Sunday afternoon educating about the JSOV. And so there'll be no gatekeeping when we take over. It's going to be education on steroids. I love educating. Paul loves educating. And so that's just going to be something that the union's going to be turned into, is one of the premier educators that there is. And so I'm excited about that. I wanted to say that real quick. Another thing, Paul, when you was talking about Article 14, which is a critical article when we're talking about JSOV, JB always includes Article 14 in JSOV cases. It's very good for us because you talked earlier about the suicide rate, how that has gone up even just 1 year, how that's gone up. I'm going to read something, it's off script a little bit, out of the IMIP, Initial Management Inquiry Process, when you talk about publication 552. And this is why Article 14 is so important. But it says costs and effects of harassment. Research indicates that 37% of American workers have been bullied at work. Even basic incivility has an effect on the workplace. For example, one study shows the following responses of 800 managers and employees in 17 industries who were workers on the receiving end of incivility at work. Incivility included rudeness, insensitivity, disrespect, and inflicted by another worker. 48% intentionally decreased their work effort. 47% intentionally decreased the time spent at work or future interactions. 38% intentionally decreased the quality of their work. 80% lost work time worrying about the incident. 63% lost work time avoiding the offender. 66% said that their performance declined. 78% said that their commitment to the organization declined. 12% said that they left their job because of the uncivil treatment. 25% admitted to taking their frustration out on customers. So that's what you're talking about, Paul, when you talk about Article 14.
And you know, Corey, that's an amazing point you bring up, because when we deal with this, when we talk about the dogs of war in a little while,
Yeah,
JSOV violations, this is the beginning of everything. This is at the head of all the problems that we face. If we can clear this up on the workroom floor, everything else is going to fall into place. All of this unjust discipline, all of this is going to roll right with treating our carriers with dignity and respect. That's the basic line right there.
exactly. And, you know, the JSOV, we should take pride in that as the NELC. You know who wrote the JSOV? Sombrado. And so that's ours. You know, we should take great pride in the joint statement on violence and behavior in the workplace. Vince Sombrado wrote the damn thing. And so to me, it's ours. And we're going to take pride in that. Another thing when you're talking about, I'm still going on script, I apologize, is when we talked about this yesterday, so you allowed it. When you talk about contentions on the JSOV, Article 19 incorporates the JSOV and any other handbook or manual you're going to put in there, Postal Service policy on workplace harassment. Also, Article 15. Article 15 incorporates the JSOV into the grievance arbitration procedure on page 15.1. And if you look at 15.1, I'm just going to read it. It's broad grievance clause. The second bullet point, alleged violations of other enforceable agreements between NALC and the Postal Service, such as building our future by working together, and the joint statement on violence and behavior in the workplace. In his award in the national case there, Arbitrator Snow found that the joint statement constitutes a contractually enforceable agreement between the parties and that the union has access to the grievance procedure to resolve disputes arising under it. Additionally, in his discussion of the case, Snow writes that arbitrators have the flexibility in formulating remedies to consider removing a supervisor from his or her administrative duties if a violation is found. And it says, note the national parties disagree over the meaning of administrative duties. And if you look up administrative, it means relating to the management of a company or the management of any office. And so to me, that's not a gray area. That's crystal clear in what administrative means. It means the management of any office. And so that's what we'll ask, is if there's a violation of the joint statement, that they'll be removed from that. But Article 15 also. So you got Article 15 and Article 19 will incorporate the JSOV into your grievance. And so, but yeah, let's get on with this. We're going to talk about 115.4. It's going to be our first slide. This is going to be your most basic one. This is when James and I, everybody was talking earlier, 115.4, maintain mutual respect atmosphere. I disagree with a lot of things that the joint statement has some level that you have to rise to find a violation. A lot of arbitrators will give you 115.4, maintain a mutual respect atmosphere. If you're on the workroom floor and manager confronts you, talks loud to you, puts something up on a whiteboard or on a television screen, 115.4 is generally where we will get some leeway there, some hay. We'll make some hay on that. But as part of the joint statement, Paul, that you read earlier, one of the things that it says, one of the lines that I use all the time when I have a manager, a supervisor that has quite a history of 115.4, but not the JSOV. If they've got quite a history of 115.4, maintaining mutual respect atmosphere, I will always attempt to include those in a JSOV case in arbitration, because it says in part, those whose unacceptable behavior continues will be removed from their position. It does not say those who have a long history of joint statement violations. It says those whose unacceptable behavior continues will be removed from their position. So if we get a 115.4, that's a start. We'll take it.
And I think,
But
Troy, that that line should be cited by stewards if they're going after a repetitive behavior issue. They should actually pull that right out of the joint statement and point to it.
yeah, yeah, because I can incorporate, you know, 5, 6, 7, 115 fours, and you've done JSOV cases before in arbitration. That's what we'll do. We'll say those whose unacceptable behavior continues. It does not say those who have a history of joint statement violation. It just merely says those whose unacceptable behavior continues. Obviously, the supervisor or manager has an issue with their ongoing behavior because I've got 4 or 5 cease and desist on 115.4. And so, anyway, the national agreement sets out the basic rules and rights governing management and employees in their dealings with each other. But it is the frontline manager who controls management's attempt to maintain an atmosphere between employer and employee, which assures mutual respect for each other's rights and responsibilities. It does not say it is the shop steward's responsibility. It does not say it's the city letter carrier's responsibility. It said it's the frontline manager who controls management's attempt to maintain an atmosphere between employer and employee. And we're going to get into a lot of this later, Paul, when we talk about dogs of war. This
Absolutely.
section of the M39 discusses an obligation of mutual respect between the employer and the employee, and we are often counseled to use this section of the M39 standing alone for initial acts of harassment, intimidation, or bullying. But it's also entirely proper to include both the JSOV and this section of the M39 to address mutual respect. I'm going to go back to the JSOV because I take things for what they mean, Paul. When you talk about going in, we're dealing with the JCAM. What it says is what it says. If there's no gray area, the JSOV says this in part. We openly acknowledge that in some places or units, there's an unacceptable level of stress in the workplace. That's what we're dealing with here is stress. That there is no excuse for and will be no tolerance of violence and or any threats of violence by anyone at any level of the Postal Service. Now listen to this. And that there is no excuse for and will be no tolerance of harassment, intimidation, threats, or bullying by anyone. It does not say that there will be some tolerance of, or a continued tolerance of, or a certain level of tolerance of. It says there will be no tolerance of harassment, intimidation, threats, or bullying. And so I like that language. It's a zero tolerance policy, and it says there'll be none of that. There'll be no excuses for. So when they say, hey, the city letter carriers just don't like my management style, that's an excuse. They don't like to be managed. That's an excuse. There'll be no excuses for, no tolerance of. And so I like that tied in with the 115.4. If there's going to be no tolerance of it, I'm going to take you for your word. You signed off on it. So anyway, that's the last one. I'm not going to do that anymore, Paul. All right, I'm going to stick to the script.
You whatever you want, brother. Do whatever you want. We're here for the day. Sunday afternoon.
Yeah, we got 4 hours left. We should be good. And so, if a step B team or an arbitrator decides that M39 section 115.4 is the only section of our contract, handbooks, or manuals that has been violated, that is their decision to make. Our position should always be that the slightest affront to our dignity and respect is worthy of a full response in our grievance, and I agree. This section of the M39 is important because it rests the responsibility on the frontline manager, and that's what we was talking about just a second ago, to address and correct any disrespectful actions. Of course, this is tough for them to do if they're the ones treating us disrespectfully in the first place. Next, we got section 665.16 of the M. It's a familiar sight to any long-serving steward. Management has no hesitation in claiming that letter carriers violate this provision and are lacking in character, integrity, if they are charged with the slightest of contractual infractions. And yet they themselves claim to be above this provision in this very same chapter, ELM 665.24. Specifically states that there must be no tolerance of harassment, intimidation, threats, or bullying by anyone at any level. Violation of this policy may result in disciplinary action, including removal from the Postal Service. There that is again, Paul, just like we read out of the JSOV.
Exactly, right
There
there.
must be no tolerance of. That means that's a zero tolerance policy.
Yeah, you got to
No
cite that.
tolerance of. Yeah, it does not say there'll be some tolerance of. It says there will be no tolerance of. If I've got 3 or 4, 5, 6, 7 cease and desist against 115.4, somebody's tolerating it. There's not supposed to be any toleration of it, but somebody is tolerating that unacceptable behavior to us, and I want to know why. I want to know why that's being tolerated, because I've got several things, Paul, the JSOV, we're going to talk about some more in the dogs of war stuff we're going to cover, but somebody's tolerating it because I still have a manager doing it. If there's going to be no tolerance of these things, why do I have 5 or 6 or 7 cease and desist against 115.4?
I'll tell you one thing,
And
Corey. If anybody does not tolerate it, it's going to be our stewards. Our stewards are not going to tolerate it.
right, right. And those things will be brought out in arbitration. No tolerance means no tolerance of it. And here we are with a case file full of tolerance. And why is that? And we'll have management answer to that. But that's good language right there for us, Paul 66524. And it's verbatim to the joint statement language. The Employee and Labor Relations Manual. Now, nowhere in ELM 66524 does it state that only letter carriers are held to these standards. In fact, it states anyone at any level. Same language as the joint statement. This is an important argument to make in our grievance. ELM 814, employee rights and responsibilities, is another helpful site. And all these things we're going to go over, just put them in your contentions. Just put them in your contentions. If they fit, they fit. If they don't, they don't. Put them in your contentions because maybe there's something that your formal A knows of that we don't, that can put in there to support these provisions. Something maybe an advocate can pull out. And so I'd rather have too much than not enough when you get to arbitration. If I don't need it, I won't use it. But I hate to need it, don't have it. So ELM 814, employee rights and responsibilities, is another helpful site. This provision states that employees have the right to become actively involved in the service's safety and health program and be provided a safe and helpful work environment. And that's going to go along, Paul, with your Article 14, right?
Absolutely.
It goes along with that language out of the IMIP when it talks about the percentages of lost work, those who avoid work. This goes hand in hand with that. You're building a case here against management. This section of the ELM mirrors some of the language found in Article 14 of the National Agreement, but it is good add-on since the ELM, as stated earlier, imparts obligations on all postal employees, not just craft letter carriers. The Administrative Support Manual is not often cited in our grievance procedure, but here it also has some helpful language regarding assaults or threats. ASM, most people, Paul, will tie that to the locally generated forms. When we grieve locally generated forms, you find that language out of the ASM.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Administrative Support Manual. But here's some other language that you can get out of the ASM. Section 228.13, disciplinary action of employees. And there's the language there. Executive Order 12196, signed in 1980, gives us language that mirrors OSHA's guaranteed protection from conditions of employment that are free from recognized hazards that are causing or are likely to cause death or serious harm. Now, hang in there with me. That's extreme. Hang in there.
Yeah, we're going to be talking about that, Corey.
Yeah. This order stands alone from OSHA, however, and due to some exclusions that we will later discuss in the OSHA Act, this executive order is important to include. This executive order also assures prompt abatement of unsafe or unhealthy working conditions. This becomes important when we address management's failure to address violations of the JSOV. In past NELC trainings, there's been a recommendation to cite OSHA violations and to request an investigation under OSHA guidelines for harassment in the workplace. Unfortunately, OSHA made some policy changes in 2017 that extremely limits their usefulness to claims of abusive workroom climates. OSHA instructed Directive CPL 0201052 which has been cited in previous NELC trainings, was replaced in 2017 with CPL 02-01-058, where a new decision tree is provided for investigating complaints. This flow chart requires first that a person be in imminent danger, which is defined as facing a threat of death or serious physical harm. Now, I could have used this in my case file down, case I did in Jackson, where the manager threatened to shoot and kill one of the carriers. I
That's a
don't know if
pretty
y'all
serious
remember that.
bed. That's a pretty
Yeah,
serious bed.
that's bodily harm. But
That's as bad as you can go.
yeah, I don't know if y'all remember the episode when I had the district manager. I put the arbitration. That's one of the things the postal inspectors came after me for, was when I put that recording up of the district manager when she reduced the removal to a letter of warning of the manager who threatened to shoot and kill one of our brothers and sisters, one of our brothers. But so that would definitely play into effect there. Serious physical harm is defined as the part of the body being damaged so severely that it cannot be used or cannot be used very well. Further, this flow chart states that bullying, intimidation, and harassment generally do not meet these criteria. Once we pass this hurdle and show that we are discussing a situation of serious physical harm, we must now prove that the violence is not a predictable part of the job and is personal. And even if we can get past that requirement, we would need to be categorized as a high-risk industry, which is defined as either healthcare or social service settings or late-night retail setting. Since we are not in that category, the flow chart would direct us to pursue a general duty clause violation. Looking at the provisions to file a claim of a general duty clause violation, we see on criteria number 3 that we again need to prove that the workplace hazard was causing or likely to cause death or serious physical harm. In this respect, we can cite the OSHA general clause as being violated only if a specific threat of serious harm occurs. There is a workaround that was discussed in the previous NELC training where we would still ask OSHA to consider drafting a hazard alert letter for a finding of harassment, bullying, or intimidation in the workplace. But again, this can only be done after an investigation of the workplace. We cannot get an investigation initiated without qualifying under the OSHA instruction directive flow chart that we looked at earlier, and bullying, intimidation, and harassment would not qualify. It's a very frustrating circle. We will include the OSHA Act in our suggested issue statements, but it will only apply in the most serious of JSOV claims where death or potential serious injury are involved. So we have a bunch of contractual sites we've listed, but how do we paste them together in an issue statement? First, every issue statement must ask a question. It must create a link to the remedy, which Paul was discussing a few minutes ago. It is very important to give a Step B team or an arbitrator a full range of violations and remedies to choose from, because winning any violation can be a building block for a future grievance. If there is one thing you should remember in all your issue statements, it's the term and or. This gives an arbitrator a chance to consider all of your allegations at once or any of them separately. Again, we need to win as many of these grievances as possible, so we're going to give the arbitrator a full buffet to choose from.
Full
A good
buffet.
issue statement could read, a good issue statement could read, did management violate the JSOV? The Postal Service policy letter on workplace harassment. I know you said earlier, Paul, to not include that in the issue because it's a policy letter.
No, we can.
Yeah.
It links enough to the JCAM, to the JSOV.
Yeah.
We can use it.
Yeah. Because, I cite 1517. A lot of people don't. It's a policy letter. A lot of people don't agree with that. I
Don't
cite it.
start that fight here, brother. Don't start that fight with me here.
But let me continue on. So the JCAM Articles 3, 5, 14, 15, 19, M39, Section 115.4, ELM 66516, 66524, 814, 824, ASM Section 228.13, and of the Occupational Health and Safety Act. Now, let me tell you, if you're going to cite all of these things, you better know what you're citing. Just like we go after management, when they put in a request for discipline and I get the discipline back from labor, and it's got about 15 different provisions on there that were never asked about. And as soon as I get into arbitration, I start asking management without looking, what does this pertain to? I have no idea. What about this one? I have no idea. Make sure if you cite something in your issue statement, you know what you're citing. Why is Article 3 relevant to this grievance? Why about Article 5? Why is that relevant? What about 14, 19? Because management, I'm telling you, Paul, you've seen it yourself. Management will say, we didn't violate 19 because that's handbooks and manuals. They have no idea why we're citing 19, that it incorporates all these different handbooks and manuals. They have no idea why we can't violate 19.
Yeah, we have to be smarter than them, brother. When we go into this grievance, we have to have everything on tap here. We need to know what we're talking about. Absolutely.
Yeah. So make sure if you cite it in your issue, you know what you're talking about, because you'll be asked about. I've had that happen to me in arbitration with arbitrator Wallets. By their actions on, talks about whatever date, or continued actions, pattern of behavior during the time period of date to date, or failure to address the above violations when they were made aware of such, and or by failing to comply with prior grievance settlements on this issue. And if so, what's the proper remedy? What are you looking for? Past grievance settlements regarding the JSOV violations that have not been adhered to also call for Article 15.3 non-compliant sites to be included in your issue statement. A failure to address an abusive work environment makes another supervisor or higher level manager equally responsible.
And we talk about this, Corey. We want to bring the highest level of management in on the table for this. Every time, if we can elevate this to a district manager having some implication, we want them brought in on the grievance.
Yes. Also important to the issue statement is to categorize the grievance as a class action. This encompasses all employees in the work area. So if more information turns up as you move further along in your investigation, you can still include it. Also, remember that violence, abuse, or harassment of one letter carrier often affects surrounding employees, sometimes even more so than the targeted victims themselves. And you saw, again, those numbers out of the IMIP. How much percentage of work is missed due to an unruly manager that's creating a toxic working environment? An environment means for all. And so when you have a toxic work environment on the workroom floor, it's easy to have a class action because you'll have people say, hey, because of how he was talking to Paul, it's very difficult to me to concentrate on work. I'm fearful now for my job because how he's yelling at Paul, got in Paul's case. And so, yeah, I'm terrified of this person. So let's take it a class action. There are a lot of steps we should take as stewards to fight JSOV violations, in addition to the actual grievance. After your issue statement is in place, you need evidence, and that means statements. Every employee who has information about or has been affected by or witnessed a potential violation should be interviewed. This means all crafts and any level of management you deem relevant, as well as any customers or witnesses from outside of the Postal Service. A terrible thing about a toxic working environment is that the goal of management is to instill fear in our letter carriers. Unfortunately, they often succeed. The goal of every tyrant is to divide and conquer, and our goal should be just the opposite, to unite and prevail. So how do we get statements of our letter carriers are fearful of retaliation? Let's interview our carriers privately and one-on-one. Some may be embarrassed of their emotions or will open up more in a quiet or private setting. Explain that retaliation is illegal and that everyone will be providing statements so no one can be singled out. Also, let the carriers know that you are only asking for the truth and no one should be afraid to tell the truth. And another thing, when we go into these stations and they're saying, hey, this guy is a tyrant, he is a bully, he is taking it out on us. I'm fearful to write a statement because why? You just said he's a tyrant, he's a bully, he's singling y'all out, he's doing all these things. It's not like he's going to start. He's already doing it. That's why we're here. And so when people say, I'm terrified of him, he's going to do this, he's already doing it to you. We're in here trying to help. We're in here trying to remedy this thing. When you talk about the dogs of war, we're in here to make sure that you come to work in a toxic-free environment. Yeah. It's already happening to you, or we wouldn't be here.
I think, Corey, that every carrier wants to stand up for themselves. They just need somebody to back them up, and that's what we're gonna do.
Yeah, yeah. If you say, hey, I've already got 6 or 7 statements from your carriers, that may help, because it is, I get it. I get it, but we're here to help you.
Yeah, and the other thing too is when carriers are nervous or afraid of retaliation, you just tell them, "Hey, they're gonna have to go through us to get to you."
Yes. You should ask the carriers to write their statements on the spot, not later. One thing, statements given sooner hold more weight with an arbitrator, but also when a carrier has time to worry about repercussions sitting at home later, they may change their minds, and that does happen. As for the actual statements themselves, suggest that your witnesses use descriptives. Some examples might be the supervisor's face was red, his voice was elevated, he was too close, violating personal space, walked over very quickly, slammed her hands on the desk. Any details will lend authenticity to a statement. And we may talk about it later, but also if a supervisor or manager cusses you out or cusses a carrier out, say that. Write it down. It's not time to be churchy on these statements. I'm a deep Southern Baptist and I don't use that language. Write it down and ask for forgiveness later after you wrote it down. But we need that on the statement. It is extremely powerful when either you read it or I read it. And so, yes, write down exactly what was said verbatim, word for word.
And Corey, I mean, you're absolutely right. The arbitrators and Step B teams have heard all these four-letter words before.
Yeah,
If you go into the arbitration program and Google any four-letter word you want, you're gonna get arbitrations that are gonna pop up. So you be honest. You tell the
yeah,
truth. You relay exactly what was said by these people, not the F word. You don't spell it out, you say it. Exactly what the
yeah.
supervisor said to the carriers.
Yeah, yes, yes. They're all adults there. They've heard it before. You're not going to shock an arbitrator. They've heard everything. So
Yeah.
try to have your witnesses avoid making derogatory comments or character attacks. And that is critical because we're trying to make them look a certain way. We don't need to make it look like we're on the floor a certain way. This fool told everybody, or this buffoon, or this SOB told everybody this. Uh, don't do that. Just say the supervisor came over and said this, and it's constant. He's constantly harassing us. Don't call them names or anything because we're trying to set us apart from them. It's hard to keep anger out of these statements, but we should focus on how the behavior of management affects us instead. If a carrier can't sleep well or keeps looking over their shoulder, if their heart is racing when a certain manager walks by, or if they are seeking counseling for stress, these are all good points to have your carrier add to a statement. You should avoid writing a blanket statement for carriers to sign. It lends less credibility than a personally crafted letter. We should request any statements that management has in their possession. Also, any 1767s filed in the installation. It is a critical part of our investigation to get information of a supervisor's prior abusive behavior and discipline records. And you and I are going to talk about that a little bit later. Again, we'll follow with Dogs of War.
Yes, we will.
This would include any EEO harassment complaints on PS Form 2564 or 2565. We should ask for a copy of the current posted JSOV poster at the facility. And if they don't give it to you, go take it off the board yourself. I've had to do that. Just go and get the zero tolerance policy. Any policy they have, if you ask for certain information, you don't get it, go take it off the board yourself, make a copy of it. USPS management training records are important as well. While on the subject of prior behavior, stewards should always research police records and do an online background check on the abusive manager. It may cost your branch 20 or 30 bucks, but it'd be unfortunate to leave this stone unturned. And they are out there. They're out there. You'll be surprised at what you find if you look it up. And later to find out that there was evidence there for us to use. Lastly, workplace climate surveys, IMIP reports, which I just read off of one earlier, the publication 552. Any workplace environment system module reports should all be requested by the steward. We should automatically be filing Articles 17 and 31 grievances and labor charges when any information is refused or delayed. Do not let management delay your grievance and attempt to make it untimely. If information is denied or held back, move your JSOV grievance forward. Always remember, we own the grievance process. We move the grievance. Management does not want you filing a substantial JSOV grievance against them. They're going to do everything they can to impede it, especially if they have really screwed up. And so make sure that you remain timely. If they're trying to kick this can down the road, move it up. It's our grievance. We move the grievance. When it comes to getting copies of management's disciplinary records, there will be much kicking and screaming going on. The service will argue that it is outside the scope of our authority to request this information. A national arbitrator has ruled that these records are fair game for the union. I got some sites there, but I've also done several episodes on relevancy letters. And you're going to get a relevancy letter when you ask for management's disciplinary record. You just are. You look to the EOPF file, you're going to get a relevancy letter. Be prepared to grieve that. All right. I got a great decision from arbitrator August that's on one of my episodes about relevancy letters where they did that. They kept giving us relevancy letters and we grieved it. We won that, but just be ready for that. You put in for management's personnel records, you're going to get a relevancy letter. Okay. So educate yourself on that. Be ready to go with that, because anytime we file a JSOV, we're going to ask for any discipline this manager has ever received. I want to see if management has ever attempted to correct this manager's behavior. You're not going to get it, but we'll file those grievances, okay? There's the decision from Carlton Snow. I'm not going to read that to you. There's the other decision from arbitrator Mittenthal, two of our best national arbitrators we've had. And so both of those will be critical for you, all right? There's also a brief on one of my episodes. You can take that and copy that. You steal that. Use it as your own. I don't care. Just cite the language off of it. It's got all these sites in there for you already, okay? It is for the union alone to determine if a grievance exists, and this is Mittenthal. It is for the union alone to determine if a grievance exists, and that's going to help you in any grievance that you file. When management tells you that the information is not relevant to your grievance, it's not for you to determine that. It's for me to determine what's relevant to my grievance, right? If the information it seeks has any relevancy to the determination, however slight, its request for this information should be granted. And that's a beautiful site for us. It's national, and they're bound. It's just like contract language. The National Labor Relations Board has also weighed in on the union's right to any corrective actions taken to address harassment complaints. NLRB JD 3815, June 26 of 2015, Albuquerque, New Mexico. The Postal Service argues that Trujillo abandoned his request when he did not explain the relevancy of the information to the respondent. The union wanted to know if corrective measures had been taken to address any possible pattern of abuse or the impact, if any, that those measures had on the pattern. The USPS violated Section 8A5 and 1 of the Act by failing and refusing to provide Sunshine Branch 504 with information the union requested. That's another great thing for us to use. Once you have a history of abusive behavior, you may get the argument that it's not admissible regardless. Past behavior doesn't prove present guilt or something like that. A good regional case to cite to include is, we'll talk about that in a minute, but that will happen. It happens a lot. Paul, you've been in enough arbitration to know they're going to say, hey, you can't use these past decisions against them because they've already been adjudicated.
We're here for this one issue. We're not here for something he did last year or the year before.
Yeah. Yeah. We were in Jackson against manager Kirby Ragsdale. We went back 13 years. 13 years of decisions on this individual, and that's what they're just raising hell. You know, hey, these already been adjudicated. They have been adjudicated with a cease and desist. And since he didn't, that means stop and don't do it any longer. We're here because he didn't stop, and he's continuing to do it. And so that's how you incorporate it, because it's a continued. When you talk about, when the JSOV says what? Those whose unacceptable behavior continues will be removed. That's what we're talking about. It didn't say those whose unacceptable behavior continued for the past 14 days. It's those whose unacceptable behavior continues. And so we will incorporate any decision, and again, we'll talk about that, Paul, about the dogs of war. Any
Right.
decision that we have, we're gonna put it in that case file. I don't care if it's 30 years ago. I'm putting it in there.
You know, Corey,
And so, and
you talked earlier about police reports.
yeah,
Just a quick aside, we had a police record that we searched on a supervisor in a JSOV case, and we found out that he had thrown a remote control at his wife one time, and we
yeah,
put that in the case file.
that speaks to behavior. Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah. It's not just if they come in and say it's work related. No, sir. No, you're like this at home. And so this person just didn't need to be any kind of managerial position. Arbitrator Jacobs, I can't remember if this is my case or not, Paul. We talked about this
Yeah, you
because
did.
I remember citing evidence 406. In this case, management objected to the union presenting evidence of past behavior by the offending supervisor manager. The union argued that past behavior was in fact demonstrated by the offender in the past. We can also cite Federal Rule of Evidence 406, which states evidence of a person's habit or an organization's routine practice may be admitted to prove that on a particular occasion, the person or organization acted in accordance with a habit or routine practice. Of course, rules of evidence are not the same as our contractual rights, but they can be referenced as the standard in judicial settings, such as arbitrations. The above rule of evidence can again be cited to include a criminal history in our grievance file. All right, once you have the witness statements and have gathered some additional evidence, you should start explaining why each of the listed provisions in your issue statement was violated. Type out the provision in your contentions and talk about it. When you talk about the Postal Service policy on workplace harassment, why is that violated here? When you got it in your issue statement, why is that violated? We talked about that earlier. When you got 6 or 7 things in your issue statement, go ahead and tell why it's violated, right? The Postal Service policy on workplace harassment, it talks about there's a commitment from the employer to the employee that there'll be no tolerance of. You got ELM 665. Why is that violated? Well, because there's a commitment from the employee, from the employer to the employee that there'll be no tolerance. The JSOV, same thing. There's a commitment from the employer to the employee that there'll be no tolerance of any of these things. And here we are. And so just make sure that if you put it in your issue statement, explain why it was violated and be ready to answer for it. As an example, M39 section 115.4 applies because the curse words directed at me by this supervisor show a lack of mutual respect. Go into detail, what was said, when it was said, why it was not justified, etc. Then move on to the next provision. Once you've provided explanations for why each is violated, be prepared to also add some arbitration decisions to support why management will say you are wrong. You do this by adding the applicable quote from the decision in your arguments, but by also attaching the entire arbitration decision to your grievance file as well. As a reminder, we will be providing you with some reading material at the end of this training. One of the most important decisions you'll be adding to your case file is a national award reached by arbitrator Carlton Snow. The grievance procedure of the national agreement may be used to enforce the parties' bargain, and arbitrators have available to them the flexibility found in arbitral jurisprudence when it comes to formulating remedies, including removing the supervisor from his or her administrative duties. And one of the things that we will add to our file, especially in dogs of war, is the arbitrator's authority under the joint statement. And that will come along with several sites. We have that on the JSOV episodes. We'll tell the arbitrator, here's your authority under the JSOV, and we'll support that contractually. We'll support that with past decisions. And so the arbitrator's authority, that will be something huge for us when we talk about training the dogs of war. And
Incidentally,
putting
the
those in the,
arbitrator has the same authority for a cease and desist remedy, which is another
yes,
topic for another day.
yes. This award is the enforcement tool of our JSOV grievance. Management will kick and scream again that letter carriers do not have the authority to discipline a supervisor. And they're right. But an arbitrator certainly does, and National Arbitrator Snow said so. Again, you want to explain in your grievance that the joint statement is a mutually enforceable agreement. And this was confirmed by National Arbitrator Snow in his decision. Make sure this award is part of your case file. Again, Paul talked earlier. The only ones who didn't sign off on the JSOV were the APW. So they're very difficult for them to try to get one in arbitration because they didn't sign it. And so management will exclude them from any kind of remedy. Management may also argue that violations of the joint statement do not necessarily qualify as violations of Article 14. We have an arbitration for that as well. And there are numerous arbitrations out there with the JSOV. Article 14 has been found. An arbitrator, August, has done it, as well as others. But here's one, Charles Remus. Here, management argues no safety-related complaint was made to management by an employee, and hence the union use of Article 14.2 is improper. When a union steward comes to a supervisor and complains that an OIC is threatened or bullied and harassed postal employees by words and actions, that is a complaint of a safety and health violation that can properly be raised at Step 2 grievance under Article 14.2C of the National Agreement. The rejection of this argument in management's Step 3 answer to this grievance is simply an example of winks and nods as skepticism, and that is language directly out of the JSOV. As the framers of the joint statement feared that some of the service's 700,000 employees might take it. Keep in mind, this and many that follow are regional arbitration awards and do not hold the same enforcement weight as a national arbitrator. They can still be cited to demonstrate how other arbitrators have decided on a certain issue. However, this decision is also important because it enforces our right to move this grievance immediately to formal Step 8 on a fast track. And anytime you put regional arbitration decisions anywhere, it's for persuasive value, right? It's so the arbitrator isn't sitting alone. And so if an arbitrator has other arbitrators that have already agreed with them on this certain position or issue, they're more likely to give it to us. They don't ever want to be sitting alone on a decision. So you're going to give them things for a persuasive value on whatever your issue is. We need to talk about levels of JSOV violations. This is kind of a contradiction in terms because every violation is serious. But we must recognize that some actions or behavior carry much more weight in the eyes of an arbitrator. For instance, a physical attack or threat of physical harm is very serious and may call for a harsh remedy on a single occurrence. On the other hand, a curse word or an isolated insinuation that a carrier is not a good worker may require multiple documented occurrences to carry the same consequence and a remedy. And it's no different than a CA1 or a CA2. A CA1, it's an immediate act. I broke my ankle. I know when I did it. CA2, it's long-term injury. That's how this is. Joint statement on violence behavior in the workplace. Violence is the CA1. The behavior is the CA2. So think of it like that. If you have a manager that's demonstrated a pattern of abusive behavior and has been documented or grieved in the past, there are several arbitrators that have ruled on harsher remedies. We have a bunch that we're going to list for you at the end of this training. Our grievance procedure is a valuable weapon in fighting workplace harassment, but I'm going to let Paul, the main man, talk to you about some other things we can do to protect our carriers as well. All right, Paul, it's all yours, brother.
All right, back on. You finally ran out of air.
I need something to drink.
Okay, so there's several steps we can take as stewards to fight JSOV violations in addition to the actual grievance procedure. Let's look at a few. Now, of course, we should always remember that any harassment that rises to the level of a crime should be reported to the police immediately. You dial 911. There's no second thoughts. If a carrier approaches you and says they've been assaulted or threatened with bodily harm, you pull out your phone and you start dialing on the spot. Your carrier's safety is more important than anything else at that moment. And you're also going to want a police report number, and you'll need to follow up on whatever action's taken. This absolutely becomes part of your grievance core. You put that police report in there, management's not going to get it for you. You're going to have to get it yourself. Now, on this side, we're looking at a form 1767. This is usually used to report like a spill in the workplace or a vehicle repair that's not done, but we can use it, this report of an unsafe condition or practice, for harassment as well. So the important aspect of these forms is that the complaint must be investigated within the same tour of duty that it's received, and a specific action must be documented by postal management. So we have a paper trail now. These become an important part of your case file to show management's response or lack of response to a claim of a toxic work environment. Now, carriers can submit this form through their stewards anonymously. The instructions on the form suggest that this be done by contacting the USPS safety officer. We're not going to do that. We're going to do this through our steward or by contacting the NALC regional office for guidance. Now, the regulations for Form 1767 are found on this next slide, which is ELM 824. So 824.632 and 636, they discuss the obligations of management, including the installation head, and abating any reports of unsafe and dangerous work conditions as reported by employees on 1767s. The key here is that management must investigate and respond with an appropriate response by the end of the employee's tour. So you have a time limit. Next slide, publication 553. We've already got some questions coming up on 553 and 552, so we're going to answer those as we go right through this. Publication 553 is the Employee Guide to Reporting Harassment. It's very important to cite, but the NALC firmly disagrees with the second paragraph on this screen. If you look at that paragraph, a single incident absolutely constitutes harassment, and this kind of contradicts that. But the statement that an incident of harassment should unreasonably interfere with work performance to be considered, that's a legal standard. That's a legal standard for determining harassment. Our contract, our handbooks, our manuals, as well as the JSOV, establish a different standard for categorizing workplace harassment. So while we're going to include this provision to argue that management may be disciplined for harassing letter carriers, we're going to talk about that second paragraph, and we're going to tell our Step B team or an arbitrator that they're discussing a legal standard here. We're dealing with a contractual standard. All right, on our next slide, and as I said, this question was already asked, this is one of the most important things you're going to see in a JSOV case. Publication 552. So when a harassment allegation is made by an employee, management is obligated to investigate. Publication 552 is the manager's guide to address workplace harassment, and there's 6 steps here that are required. I'm going to read these for you. Step 1, respond promptly. Step 2, obtain information. Step 3, begin the IMIP, the initial management inquiry process. Step 4, evaluate information. Step 5, develop a plan of action. And step 6, follow up. Those are your 6 steps. Now, you got to be aware here, this is very important, that there's not a written record of this investigation until the IMIP process in step 3. You also have to be aware that step 2 provides an investigating supervisor that can discuss the remedy with the complainant and not proceed to the IMIP written step if it's not warranted. So you need to confer with your carriers and let them know that they should request a written investigation. Do not settle for a handshake, a promise. This is where your supervisor is going to try to short circuit the process. At step 2 of this investigation, they're going to try to verbally settle this process. You got to talk to your carriers and tell them, do not do that. As a matter of fact, a carrier would be wise, and you should encourage them to ask for a steward in any meeting that could lead to discipline. And a carrier could reasonably expect discipline if they're being questioned on a work-related incident involving harassment, because say, for instance, a carrier said that, yes, a supervisor was harassing me and I felt like lashing out. That's absolutely grounds for discipline. So anytime a carrier is brought in regarding a JSOV complaint or a harassment complaint, make sure they ask for a steward. Stewards need to step in anytime. If you're a steward, be proactive and tell the carrier they need representation for this. So an IMIP report and findings should be included in your grievance, of course. But here's a little aside, and this might surprise some of you. An OIG report found that 97% of postal managers never completed the training to complete the IMIP investigations properly. So out there, when you're dealing with your supervisors, you have a 3% chance that the supervisor knows what he's doing.
Hey, Paul, let me say something right there.
Okay, are you
because
surprised by that, Corey?
No,
Okay.
I think, matter of fact, I think we were talking about that training, the OIG training on compliance or whatever, and they said that 90-some% hadn't done their training. I had that a few weeks ago. Well, here this is, but would you consider a grievance a form? I'll read to you exactly what publication 552 says on the very second page. Respond promptly to the complaint regardless of its form or content. And so a grievance to me would be a form of some kind of content. So
That's actually
if
the
I file a,
definition, that's the definition of a grievance, is a
yeah,
complaint.
if I file a grievance on a supervisor, to me, they're obligated then, once I give that to them and have statements, to initiate an IMIP. And that's what I held, if you remember in the Memphis miniseries, and I'm questioning the formal step A, isn't the grievance a form of a complaint and a statement? Wouldn't that be, once you've seen the statement about this harassment, wouldn't that be enough to trigger an IMIP? And so when it states, respond promptly to the complaint regardless of its form or content, I'm going to hold management accountable to that. When you talk about the Postal Service policy on workplace harassment, that's where you first find publication 552 under management's responsibilities. It says they must. Doesn't say they might, they should. It says they must. Uh, Under publication 552, initiate an IMIP once I get any form of complaint.
And we
And
should file,
so
and we should file a grievance if they don't proceed with that. You're
I,
absolutely right. It's their
I put in
obligation.
I put in a request for information about a week after that complaint, that statement. They saw that statement and said, "Hey, I shown you the statement and the grievance about the toxic working environment or whatever the supervisor did. I need to. I'm putting this information request. I want to see where you've initiated the IMIP. At least reached out to HR and said, well, I didn't do that. Well, it says here that you must do it. So maybe we have a grievance there as well, that you didn't do one of your responsibilities under your own policy."
Yeah, absolutely, brother. Absolutely. So finally, if an incident involves any threat or act of violence to letter carriers, a steward should formally request the involvement of a threat assessment team. Now, this is management's team, I understand, but we want a formal investigation. So if you Google publication 108, which is the threat assessment team guide, I think it's a 30 or 40-page document. This should be included in your grievance, the entire document. The threat assessment team guide provides a risk rating for a complaint, and I'm going to read these to you as well. Priority 1 is an extreme risk, a clear and immediate threat of violence to an identifiable target. Priority 2 is a high risk, a threat of violence, usually either to an identifiable target but currently lacking immediacy, or a specific plan or violence but not lacking a specific target. Priority 3 is a lower moderate risk, a relatively nonspecific threat of violence from a person expressing concerns with personal or organization issues. And the last one, priority 4, no threat of violence indicated. Corey, can you tell me what you think a manager is going to determine the threat of their supervisor to be? What level do you think it's going to be? They're going to, no threat of violence indicated, right? We found them innocent.
Yeah, that's something that you always deal with. It's not the results that I'm concerned about, is if you did it, because management will never manage management. We've always talked about that. They're never
Right.
going to correct themselves. They're going to, whatever the manager did, this IMIP process is, they found nothing.
Right.
We
And
went in, we talked to the carriers, we found nothing. But the thing about publication 552, the IMIP process in itself is you got statements. You're going to have the statements there where carriers have filled them out, where you question the carrier. We'll get all of that, because what you're going to have the carriers saying and what management's determination is are going to be two entirely different things. And if we can get that manager in there on the stand and say, "No, this carrier said that, they're threatened so much that they sat out in the car crying every morning. You didn't think that that was substantial enough to warrant," or "this carrier did this." And it really makes them look stupid. So it's not the results that we want, because it will always come out in management's favor. I want to know if you did one. And if you
Exactly.
did one and you said nothing happened, that's typical for management, because management will never manage management. And
But
that's just the way it is.
this is the winks and nods that the joint statement
Yes,
talks about, and that's what we're
yeah,
looking for here.
exactly.
Yep, yep. But and on another note too, this is a little aside from what we're training you on today, but if a carrier that you're representing is charged with any kind of a harassment or threat, or they're taken out of work on a 16-7, ask for this same report, because you want to see what the final risk rating that the Postal Service determined to be in that situation too, because that might exonerate your carrier. Just a little aside there. So, next slide. A steward should always request a threat assessment team final disposition report. Management is not going to want to give this to you, again, because it's going to show that they're winking and nodding and not taking care of a problem. They're going to give you reports of an initial investigation showing how hard they worked, but they're going to delay and avoid giving you their final risk rating and corrective action. So you're going to need to push for this report. You're going to have to keep filing and asking for it. Make sure this is what they're giving you, the final disposition report. And if it's withheld, you're going to file a grievance on that. Now, this is the document that holds management accountable for their response to the threat, so it's very important to get that report. On our next slide, both the IMIP investigation, the threat assessment team reports, these are both entered into something called the Workplace Environment Tracking System, or WETS. So a steward should also request any records or reports from this system. Next slide, let's talk about some remedies. Let's get to the remedy part of our grievance. So we want every supervisor that harasses our letter carriers to be fired on the spot, right? I mean, that's in a perfect world, that's what should happen. But as Corey said earlier, arbitrators are going to weigh the level of violation when granting us a remedy. So we're going to take the same approach in our remedy as Corey suggested in our issue statement. We're going to put a lot on the table, as Corey would say, a buffet to choose from. We don't want exoneration, but we got to recognize that it's a rare and substantial violation that's going to result in direct discipline to a member of management. So remember, the joint statement said those whose unacceptable behavior continues will be removed from their position. So we want to build that brick wall. And if we have to do it one brick at a time, that's how we're going to do it. And this is why you don't let a small, what you consider a small violation to go, because you can't build a case against a supervisor unless you have that first grievance on the hopper. So in your particular situation, if it rises to the level where a supervisor could be disciplined, if it's a severe action or if you've got a built-up case of continued behavior, you want to include the removal of the supervisor in your remedy. So you're going to review prior arbitration decisions that we've listed after this training. They're going to give you some insight. We're going to group them up and show you how to use them. But remember, it's better to win a case, like I said, and put that brick in the wall that we're building than to ask for only our absolute best remedy and end up with nothing at all. So when and if a grievance ends up in the hands of an NALC advocate to argue at a hearing, they're going to stress which remedies are most appropriate for the offense. And that's where our final disposition of our grievance is going to end up at. So remedies, like Corey said, like I've said, we've told you a bunch of times, reiterate the snow award. Management is also held accountable to the joint statement. That's very important. That's the one thing that they're going to argue that you can't touch us. And we're going to say you're wrong. The arbitrator Snow in a national award said that you are held liable just as well as carriers. Verbal remedies or apologies, not acceptable. I don't want you to say you're sorry if you hurt one of our carriers. I don't want to hear about it. I don't want your cup of coffee, your donuts on the workroom floor. You've already committed the crime. I don't want to hear what you have to say about it. We're going to go after it in the grievance procedure. We want to make the grievance whole for any lost wages or benefits or financial losses. Now, it's very hard. Now, I know we want to make pain and suffering part of our grievance, right? But we can't really say those words. But we can request what affects the carriers. If they've lost wages, if they've had to seek medical treatment, if they've lost time with their family, all these other benefits, those can be part of a grievance settlement. Maybe a signed acknowledgement of a violation. That's always nice to have on the bulletin board at work, a supervisor saying that they admit that they violated the joint statement. Next slide. Maybe a signed recognition of a specific inappropriate behavior to be posted. That's also a good remedy to put up there. Anger management training. Now, here's very important. Don't let the Postal Service send their supervisors to their own internal anger management training, because it doesn't exist. They're going to put them in a room with a computer screen running while the supervisor's drinking coffee on their phone. That's not what we want. We want a certificate of completion that they've actually gone to an anger management course. And OSHA does provide a specific course for this. You can look that up. Make sure they have to go somewhere and get trained. Don't make this easy for them. And we're going to want proof of that training. We want something to hang on our wall and put in our future grievances. And we want a cease and desist. I'm telling you right now, brothers and sisters, I realize, Corey realizes, James realizes, there are some voices in the NALC that have adopted an atmosphere of caution towards cease and desist remedies. We're not going to buy into that. The abuse of our carriers warrants an order of absolute compliance. We're not here for a maybe or a promise. We're here for contract compliance. So you're going to ask for a cease and desist.
Let me say something.
Go right ahead,
We,
brother.
we talked about this yesterday.
We did.
When you talk about if somebody comes up to you, Paul, manager or something, and they berate you in your case about not making a 22-minute load time, not making an hour office time, and they're berating you in front of your peers, and we file a grievance under 115.4, nothing pisses me off more than to get a decision back saying both parties are reminded of their obligation to maintain a mutual respect atmosphere. Well, why do I need to be reminded? I filed the damn grievance.
Right,
I don't
exactly.
I don't need to be reminded. I filed the grievance. Why are you reminding me? I'm filing the grievance on the guy who's over here berating my people, and you're gonna tell me that I'm reminded of it. Hell, I filed it. Uh, that right there chaps my ass because it carries no weight whatsoever. No weight when you say both parties are reminded. Okay, and what has that got to do with him berating Paul in his case in front of his peers? That's what you're talking about. You've got to have a cease and a desist. Stop and don't do it any longer. Because if we're going to say there's this commitment from everything that they have, every publication that you can find, there's a commitment from them to us, that does not help me. If you're saying there's no tolerance of, that doesn't help. I can't use that. I can't use that. I can never put that in a file because it's going to say, well, that doesn't show guilt of anybody. I know it, but he berated, but it doesn't show guilt of anybody. But I got Paul here. He's going to take, it doesn't show guilt of anybody. It does me no good because both parties are reminded of, okay,
Yeah. This is
I know.
just like what you
Yeah,
just said, Corey, about carriers having to stand up and make their statement and make their fight. Well, we have to make our fight too. If
yeah,
we don't
and get
fight for a cease
crushed.
and desist, yeah, if we don't even fight for our rights, who the hell are we?
Yeah,
To
you hear that
comply with.
so much from stations when you go in, they'll say, I've already filled this out. I've already written statements. I've already done all of this. I remember when we were in Hattiesburg, we've already filled all these statements out. Nothing's happened. Nothing's going to happen this time. I'm not even going to get involved. That's what happens when you beat the workforce down, when you're trying to do something against an unruly manager and you get some mealy mouth language that you can't use. Carriers just say, whatever, I'm not even getting involved anymore. Good luck with that. And you run into that all the time. Carriers, you ask carriers to come testify. I'm not even going to deal with that. Nothing ever happens. I'm not going in there. And so, yeah,
But on the
you've
other
got
hand, Corey, on the other hand, when they see things starting to happen, they're going to get excited. They're going to start
that.
fighting.
Yes, yes. Go
So,
ahead.
all right. So,
Sorry.
so going on here, a blanket posted statement by management that they will comply with the JSOV is garbage. We don't need that standing alone. They're supposed to already be complying with the JSOV, just like Corey said. An agreement that you're going to do what you're supposed to do is nothing to us. You already knew it. We're going to file our grievance. We're going to get a solid remedy. A supervisor's name be removed from all duties managing letter carriers. If we can support this level of remedy, Corey's got 6 or 7 of these that you won, right, brother?
Yeah, we've been successful. I think we've had the great fortune of relieving 6 or 7 managers from their responsibilities to supervise city letter carriers, and so that's a good thing.
Yeah, and it's their
They
good
need to
fortune as
be
well. It's their good
they need to
fortune as
be
well. I hope they're
yeah
enjoying their careers at McDonald's.
yeah cleaning toilets or something. That's what they're good for.
Right, right. So, and all remedies must be citable with specific language in the remedy stating such. We don't want a grievance remedy that we can't cite because we just talked about building that wall. Well, every brick has to be a citable remedy. So don't let yourself be fooled into a better remedy that can't be cited. I would rather take a 1154 remedy that can be cited than something that can't be. And use the words and or. Whenever you do your remedies, the same thing as we said with the issue statement, you want to have a wide variety of remedies so that the arbitrator or an advocate can choose which remedy is most appropriate. Okay, our next slide. This is exciting, Corey. National level changes that we need. Let's talk, brothers. So I think we both agree, and I think James agrees, and I think everyone on the CLC slate agrees, that our carriers, our stewards are not idiots. they can read a regional and a national arbitration award and they can learn from that. And we're going to make those available to our carriers again, aren't we?
Yeah, I remember, Paul, when I first started this podcast and I was putting sites out there, and a lot of people got on social media, quit putting sites on there because it doesn't pertain, or we don't need to give y'all access to that because y'all don't know what you're talking about. We're not idiots down here on the working floor. If I've got an Article 8 5G violation, I'm not going to put an Article 16 case in there. I'm not a dumbass. I know how to read. I know what it applies to things. Will we have that? Well, of course. You're going to have that small percentage that may put in a wrong site. One of the greatest tools I ever had in learning, and I say this all the time, is reading arbitration decisions. I've read thousands upon thousands. Hell, I've read thousands just doing this podcast, getting ready for episodes. Not this podcast, but my podcast, getting ready for episodes. Uh, there's no greater tool because it gives you an issue statement. It gives you what topics you're looking for, whether it's opting,
And
deems
you find
desirable.
and you find out what works and doesn't work too, brother. And you get new
Yes,
ideas. You get new ideas on what other stewards have put forward that actually applies to your grievance.
it has management's position. That's generally not going to change. Every once in a while, they'll throw something different in there, but management's position, if you have 1,000 cases, will be the same in 950 of them. So you'll get ready for management's position. This is generally what they talk about. How are we going to defend that or beat that? And then you have our position. That's going to help you because it'll have sites in there that we've used already and things that we may not have thought of. And then the arbitrator's decision, whether good or bad. Why did he rule against us? Was it just a bad decision or did we really miss something? And that will help us as well. But it's invaluable to learn. I had boxes and boxes of B team decisions and boxes of arbitration decisions. And I read those things religiously. That's good stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, I used to be up, Corey, on my leadership application for Leadership Academy. One of the things I wrote is up till 2 a.m. reading arbitration decisions
Yeah.
because I love doing that. You learn
Yeah.
so much from those decisions,
Yeah.
and we need access to that. And you know what else we need is we need the dogs of war, brother. Let's talk about
Yeah.
the dogs of war.
Yeah.
So, we've talked about this, you and I, Corey and James, and we're going to be sending teams into offices around the country for a variety of things. But number one on that list, and it's not a list, it's a pyramid, because the top of the pyramid, the most important thing, is the disrespect and harassment of our letter carriers. And I think everything flows from that. Once you have carriers being respected on the workroom floor, you're not going to have this nonsense discipline. You're not going to have these things happening out there, with the TV monitors, because they're going to understand. And once we start involving district managers in our grievances, once we start going into places, they're going to start self-managing themselves, brother. They're going
Yeah.
to say, "Oh shit, that office just had some." I just said a four-letter word. They're going to have people come in. They're going to have people come in, and they're going to say, that last office just had a team come in there. What did they do wrong? We better not do that to our carriers. That's where we need to be.
Yeah.
We need to be at the place where management is afraid of the NALC because they should be. We should be a strong union. There shouldn't be
Yeah.
any of this. We shouldn't be putting out fires once the building's on fire. We should be putting out fires the minute we see somebody with a match. There's no
Yeah.
reason for us to wait for this to happen. What's happened to
Yeah.
our carriers?
Yeah. Well, James Henry, when we were talking, he said there's two things, was really much, but two things we're going to address immediately. Education. Education is going to be at a premium here. We're going to make sure that the workroom floor is educated. How are we going to do that? And I've said it a million times. You're the one tasked with that, with
Appreciate that.
educating the workroom floor, every level. He said the toxic working environment. We came up with dogs of war because it sounded good, sounded tough.
It does.
But it's those teams that are going to be trained unlike anyone has ever been trained at this union. It's the Delta Force of JSOV, and they're going to go into the worst of the worst places. They're going to answer to no one but us. They're going to come straight from national. They're going to, there's not going to be any influence whatsoever from anybody, and they are going to be the consequence of what management has been doing. When I talk about the consequence, and used the story about those guards I mean, those inmates a long time ago. When you have those managers that decided that, hey, they take great delight in causing my brothers and sisters harm, whether it's mental or physical, and they have a history of that, uh, we're going to set the dogs on them and we're going to get results. Another thing that you and I talked about is that we're going to have a database. Any violation of 115.4 on a supervisor or manager, that name and that resolution will go into a database. Mean has already said he can get that up and running day one. And so it will go into a database. That way, if they try to hide somebody, you always talk about, Paul, how they put them in witness protection program.
It's my line. You use my line. Exactly. Yeah,
I
witness
will
protection program.
I take it back then. I didn't say that. So
Yeah.
you can use it.
No, that's okay. No, you're right though. They put him in a witness protection program. That's what they do to a bad supervisor. They give him a promotion and they move him along. And we have
Yeah,
to follow them. What they've done needs to follow them wherever they go.
yeah. Here,
100%.
here, here's what I'm going to hold them to, Paul, when we talk about the dogs of war. When you look at the joint statement on the violence behavior in the workplace, this is what it says: the United States Postal Service as an institution and all of us who serve that institution must firmly and unequivocally commit to do everything within our power. There'll be no tolerance of. All right. Then you go to section 66524 of the ELM. The Postal Service is committed. There's another time that it says committed. There must be no tolerance of. So you've got the JSOV, you got the ELM talking about there'll be a commitment from them to us that there'll be no tolerance. You got the Postal Service policy on workplace harassment. The United States Postal Service is committed to providing a work environment free of harassment. Goes on, the Postal Service is committed in providing its employees safe, productive, and inclusive workplace. I pulled 2 district zero tolerance policies off of online. The Rio Grande District is committed to fostering a positive and safe working environment. Here's another one, another district zero tolerance policy. We are committed in the effort to, so we're going to hold them to that commitment. If you're going to tell me that you're committed, we're going to hold you to that commitment. And these teams are going to go on and make sure that you're being held to that commitment. And that's what's going to happen. We're
And
going to
Corey,
have these teams that are
and
going to go in.
that's going
Huh?
to happen on day one, Corey. And so
Yes. Yep.
I want the listeners to know that this isn't something that we're going to start researching on day one. Right now, we've got just under 80 people in a group that are working on training for this. We're working on plans. We're working on hotspots around the country. Day one is going to be a team January 1st or 2nd standing in front of a supervisor, and we're going to be talking to them, and they're not going to like what they have to hear.
Yeah. Yeah. We'll bring them up, train them. However many teams we need, that's how many it's going to, I mean, we're going to have. I know that I announced the dogs of war, and in 2 days I had to quit announcing it. I think we had over 160 sign up in the first day and a half. And I just sent you some more information on others that have reached out before we started this thing, wanting to be in the dogs of war.
Yeah, and we're not done asking for people's help either, so that's going to
Yeah.
continue.
Yeah, but it's going to be handled. It's a priority to James, so it's going to be a priority to me, and it's going to be a priority to you. That the toxic working environment is handled. We are failing miserably in protecting our brothers and sisters on the workroom floor that are being harassed daily by these assholes that come in, that wake up, and they strive, they enjoy. You know what I'm talking about. They target us. Uh, all these things that they're doing, you're talking about the loss of money, they're going broke. It's going to escalate that behavior. I've already seen it when people send me stuff. And so when we get in there, the consequences are coming.
I want to tell you a little story, Corey. I had a new steward that I brought on in my office, and he was being brought in for an II. And it was bullshit, of course, right? And I said, we both know that this is garbage, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this supervisor cry. And I said, I want you to see how I do that. And I brought him in there, and this supervisor, every time she asked him a question, I said, yeah, but what you're really trying to say is that you don't like this carrier. No, no, no. But what you're really trying to say is that you don't like and before, Corey, this supervisor was sobbing, the eyes were filled up, and I let her down easy. I said, okay, so what we're gonna do now, and I moved on. And during that I looked at that steward and I said, do you see what I just did right there? So this is what we're gonna do. I can't wait for the day, Corey, when I'm calling you and saying I made another one cry. Because we're gonna break them. We're gonna break them and they're gonna stop harassing our carriers. I'm telling you. I'm excited about it.
Yep.
But all right, let's talk about some resources on our next slide. So we've got a bunch of arbitration decisions here. We've grouped them into some categories for you. So the bottom three bullet points here, you'll see that there's egregious and substantial remedies. So those are some arbitrations where the supervisor did something extreme and we were able to ask for a large remedy at the very beginning. The next bullet point, which is the second from the bottom, is patterns of abuse. So, we talked about the joint statement where unacceptable behavior continues. These cited arbitrations, these are all going to support your case. Now, again, if these are regional cases, and most of them are, you're going to say that they're there for persuasive value to show how other arbitrators have already ruled on the issues. You get a couple of ADA arbitration episodes there that Corey mentioned, episodes 36 through 39. And if you go back to the top, we've got some of the other sites that we have: improper use of DOIS grievances, denial of Article 14s, denial of info, court decisions, and on the right box, you've got some online sites: EEO, USERA, MSPB, if you have some military background and they're harassing you, OIG. So the OIG might help us. I mean, it's always something we have to report to. And of course, the whistleblower, the OSHA whistleblower division. So that's what we have for you. I'd like to conclude with a little something here for you. If there's one thing you should take from you with this training, it's that there's no such thing as a little harassment or minor abuse. Every single attack on our letter carriers must be addressed. And the manager that does these things to our brothers and sisters, just like Corey said, they should be treated like career criminals. There's no relocation, there's no bail, there's no parole, there's no apology accepted. I was having a bad day, I'll buy the carriers a bunch of donuts, let's just get through this. No. As a steward, you have a job to do. This union's going to have your back 100% in defending our brothers and sisters. But we have to fight. So I think we're going to take a few questions next. And one of the questions actually goes along with what I just said here. I'm going to bounce around, Corey, but one of the questions here is, what if a steward can't get out of management's pocket and take care of what needs to be done?
Yeah, that's
That's a question. We hear that a lot. And unfortunately, there are stewards out there who don't have, I don't want to say the fight in them. They might have gone astray.
yeah,
They've forgotten what their goal is, and that's kind of what Corey and I and James and Kamitra are going to do. We're gonna teach them again that they need to represent their carrier. So if we get reports of this, we're going to investigate it, and we're going to make sure that stewards are doing their jobs.
yeah. Well, Paul's going to work hand in hand with every business agent and whoever the director of health and safety is going to be. He's going to work hand in hand with those individuals. Okay. When we talk about these teams going in. And so the dogs of war will have certified those individuals that will go on that workroom floor in lieu of the regular steward. That does not mean that the regular steward's not doing their job or that they're not. We're going to remove all of that so that there is no influence one way or the other. So that they're not worried about intimidation or retaliation. We're going to remove that. Like I said, they're going to answer to us and us alone. They're not going to answer to anybody else, any branch president or business agent. They're going to answer to Paul. And so that's how it's going to be. If you have a steward that you feel is not doing his best or her best, it's the chain of command. You got to go to the branch president. If they're not willing to help or intervene, you go to the business agent. Unfortunately, you got a lot of business agents that don't know their ass from a hole in the ground. And so we have several that are going to be on the slate that are going to replace those already. And so, yeah, there has to be some kind of accountability through the chain of command. When there's not, you have what you have now.
But
There's,
Corey, I think too that a big part of this is that stewards just don't have the education. If you don't know how to file a grievance, you sit down with management and you make some deals that maybe you shouldn't make. We need to
Yeah,
teach stewards how to file a grievance. You know,
that's coming.
yeah, sometimes it's just the education that they're lacking, you know,
Yeah,
and they're trying to settle things the best that they can, and they've gone down the wrong road. So
yeah,
we're gonna
and
fix
that's
that.
coming. That's coming. Yeah,
Yeah. Here's another question. What do we do when the Form A won't forward the cases to Step B for repeated violations?
same thing.
Same thing, same thing. Go through your chain of command. Uh, Formal A settlements, I mean, you might get some Formal A settlements, but you're gonna have to write down that they're precedent setting, because they can be, if you write it in the decision, we need the
Yeah,
bricks in the wall. We don't need a settlement that's not gonna help our carriers. So if you're
yeah.
gonna settle at Formal A, make sure that you write something that is precedent setting, and you're gonna have it citable. Let's see, here's another, um, can we grieve the same event using separate grievances? For the JSOV, yes. So we always argue this in management, Corey, that if a carrier is disciplined for attendance, right, they get a letter of warning, you can't mention it again in the 7-day suspension, because they've already had the chance to correct themselves, right?
Hmm.
But you're going to mention
Hmm.
the prior discipline.
Hmm.
So what we're going to do is we're going to discipline our supervisors, in effect, when we have a grievance settlement, and we're going to cite that grievance settlement. So yeah, their previous behavior is going to be on the table. I would say, wouldn't you
Yep.
agree?
Well, read that again.
So the
Did they
question
say
was,
the same incident?
can we grieve the same event using a separate grievance letter? So the way I'm taking that is, um,
The same event, if
oh,
it's
I see. For two different grievances, like filing for not providing a 3996 is both a failure to provide and a JSOV. Yeah, you can file two grievances for the same event if you have different issues. Sure.
yeah, yeah, you have to make sure that issues spells out completely what you're talking about,
Right. So
so that when you
you
get
can
in there,
also have an issue statement that addresses two violations too. So you could have one
yeah,
grievance with two violations, or separate issue statements and different grievances if you'd like.
yeah.
Are non-stewards
Paul
able
and
to
Corey.
Yep,
Paul and Corey.
sure.
Can you hear me all right?
Oh, yeah.
This is James, and you got to forgive me because I'm here at work. Like I said, I'm in travel, so I don't know if this had came up, but one of the things that I wanted to point out with regarding the filing and the processing of these JSOV grievances, something that would seem very small, but is very significant, in particular if we go to arbitration and we want to drag the net with regards to the managers and the individuals that are involved. One, regarding the incident date, you want to make sure that you file the incident date, whatever it you are alleging it is, and ongoing. If that is not ongoing in there, you're going to be restricted to just that one date. And if they can establish that something did not occur on that day, because you filed it within the 14 days, a lot of times in my experience has been that a union representative will say, well, I filed it within 14 days, and they think that that covers the period for them to be successful with an incident date. You have to cite a date that some alleged behavior occurred, excuse me, and secondly, and make it ongoing so you can be able to cover that period and going back as well and going forward if additional information, additional behavior occurs prior to the grievance being processed all the way through. Secondly, this is important as well. Make sure that you file it as a class action, because we're protesting the conduct of the employer, actually, the agent of the employer. If you only file it because other people are affected, if you only file it, say, for letter carrier Bolanger, you're only going to be able to include information that occurred regarding to Bolanger. You file it as a class action, you're able to include and get witnesses from other prior grievances that may not have heard right then and there, but being able to show that pattern of conduct that's not necessarily just restricted to that specific carrier, that this is a wide-ranging pattern of conduct. So filing it as a class action, my advice is don't just file it because Paul Bolanger comes to you and say, I'm filing a JSOV grievance on behalf of Paul Bolanger. File it as a class action and then cite Paul Bolanger. Similarly, The same thing when it comes to the issue statements. I remember hearing something briefly about the issue statements in there, and it just an extra advice as well is that when you are citing that, a lot of times it would behoove us to state, did the employer, through the actions of whoever that supervisor is, because now you are including those that are responsible for holding that individual accountable. Because that person that acted out is just the agent, but you want to make sure that the employer is held accountable as well,
Very
because
good point.
that's what makes happen. Because what we understand here through experience is that people do or don't do things for one or two reasons, either because they don't know or they don't care. You want to make sure that the people that's higher up are aware of this behavior, and you loop them in by including in your issue statement, did the employer, through the actions of whoever that supervisor is or that manager is or that postmaster, whatever the case may be. Those are just three things that, if you covered it already, forgive me, but I do want to point out, file these grievances as class action so we can include everybody's issues and we can show that this is not an isolated incident. And then also make sure that your incident date has ongoing in it. So you can include other issues or other occurrences as that grievance is being processed.
Great
Yeah,
point, James.
that
Actually, great
that's
point.
something that James and Paul and I talked about, going back to the dogs of war, is that we're going after district managers. And so when you talk about the employer, the agent, whatever, we're going after district managers because they've been complacent. They've not done what they're supposed to do. The district manager is up here. Everybody in the district is down here below them. So they're over everyone in the district. So we're going to go after district managers with the dogs of war because, like I've always said, you can have an informal settlement. Management doesn't have to abide by it. We see it all the time. A formal A, DRT, arbitration award. Management doesn't have to abide by it. You know, we just keep filing. What you do is you become that inconvenience. When you talk
Absolutely.
about the employer, you inconvenience them enough to where they want to get invested in their subordinates. And
Yeah.
that's because you say, hey, Paul sends an email to a district manager, so we got this manager so-and-so, just letting you know that the team's going in there. If there's anything that you have done to kind of suppress this toxic manager, let us know. Because now they're on the record, they can be brought into arbitration. They do not want to come into arbitration and answer to some advocate for the NELC who's going to go put his uniform on the next day. They hate that shit. And so that's what we want. We want to be the inconvenience. And so when you have that issue, you target them. You got the supervisor, then you have those above him. And that's what James is talking about. You go
And
after
what do I
those
call
above them.
and what do I call that, Corey? Often you hear me about using the term drag the net. That's
Yeah.
what you want to do. You
I
want to
love
drag the net. You want to ensnare them all because you
Yeah.
can't make management do anything, but you can certainly make them want to do the right
Yeah.
thing by self-preservation. And
Yeah.
that's what you do. And here's a little tactic for those of you that say, well, how can I make sure that everyone is involved? One, that's one method, as Corey stated, about sending out communications to the higher ups. And then also contractually, they can avoid this. Contractually, our collective bargaining agreement requires and provides an obligation and a right for the parties to have a labor management meeting. Make that part of your agenda. Management's behavior or misbehaving, and you include that on your agenda. First of all, when you have this going on, in addition to filing a grievance, in addition to filing that 1767, because that 1767 comes in three parts. One of those parts goes to the district safety manager. It says it right on there.
That's
They
a great
can't
point.
avoid it. That it goes right to the district safety manager, and then management supposed to respond or have an obligation per Section 8 of the M by end of that employee's tour to respond. That means the supervisor and the approving official, which is usually the installation head. So now you're dragging the net. But in addition to, like I said, in addition to that grievance, request a labor management meeting. Take meticulous minutes. Both parties, the installation head and the district, I mean the installation head and the union president usually are the ones that sign off on those minutes, saying we agree this is what was discussed, and these are the agreements that we came to. Place that into your grievance as well, because now you have made others involved and aware as well.
I agree, 100%, James.
Yeah,
Very good
and
point.
one of the things that we used to do, and I have not seen it as of late, Paul and James, is on the DRT decisions, B team decisions, on the very last page, you had it who it was all sent to. You would send it to the Formal A, you'd send it to this person, you'd send it to the district manager, this decision. And so I used to use that against them when they'd come in, I've never heard of this, and I'd say, well, hang on, let's go to the last page of this decision on page 299. You are the district manager, right? Yes. So you did get a copy of this. You just chose not to read it, or you chose not to get involved. And so that's another thing I'd like to see come back is put down who it went to, because they can't say, I never saw this. Well, yeah, you did. It's right here. You chose not to read it. But yeah, it did go to you, because I've got here, it was courtesy copied to you on the back of this DRT decision. I don't think they do that anymore. But like you say, James, when you're casting that net, I want everybody. I don't want just the floor supervisor. I want all of them. And when we talk about the dogs of war, we're going after all of them. And because I want it stopped, James wants it stopped. And so how you do that is you go after all of them. And you put in a team that doesn't care about anything, and they answer to nobody, and that's what you do.
And there's a case that I did, a JSOV case out of Redondo Beach, California, maybe 10, 12 years ago. And Monat was the arbitrator. And he gave some good language. And it's right on point to what Corey is speaking of. And somebody can look it up and make it available for you as well. He said in that award, because management was arguing, I did not know. And he said, but you should have known.
Yes.
You know, not claiming here that you don't know is inexcusable. Ignorance of the law is no excuse for the law.
Yeah.
You should, he said, they should have known.
Yes.
And so this is the kind of stuff that we have to make sure that we do, and make sure that we hold them accountable. The ones that are responsible for holding the lower ones accountable, we need to hold them accountable, and we need to make arguments in the grievance file that through the employer through the actions of whatever supervisor and the inaction of whoever the higher ups are.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the perfect example we're talking about, James, when Paul sends them that initial email, we're going in to this station, to this manager. You cannot tell me you didn't know. Like you're saying, James, well, you should have known because we sent you this email. Or you should have known because you got these B team decisions. You should have known because you're the district manager. The thing about district managers is they want numbers. When you talk about the JSOV saying, talking about the numbers, it's not the excuse for the abuse of anyone, making the numbers. They're about making numbers. You got to be that inconvenience to where the numbers don't matter anymore because their ass is getting dragged into arbitration. You got to be president over numbers. The city letter carriers have got to quit being numbers to these people. And you do that by dragging them through the mud. And that's what we're going to do. But that's a perfect example of what James is talking about. You should have known. And we'll make that case. You did know. Yeah. Because we put you on notice. You can't make that excuse in here. And why didn't you do anything about it?
Yeah, and Corey, these district managers, they've got a list of things that they need to do every day. We need to get on that list. We need to be on the top of that list. We need to deal with the NALC and make sure that these carrier complaints are addressed. We need to be on the list.
It's coming. It's coming.
It's coming. Another question here, Corey. Are non-stewards able to interview witnesses? So contractually, no. Article 17 and 31 only give steward rights to stewards. So I suppose if you're a carrier on the workroom floor and you've heard that some carriers are being harassed, you can talk to them and you can see if they'd be willing to write statements, but before we get anything official, you should get a steward involved to get those statements from the carriers.
Well, we can file our own grievance under 15. I do have that one decision, I've not seen any more, that says a non-steward can request information for their grievance. Now, if you're going to do a class action grievance, I do not think that that would be very successful, being as you're not a certified steward.
Right.
But grieving for yourself, now, if you're getting statements for a grievance for yourself, you know, you can take a shot. Like I said, I got that one site that talks where the arbitrator says you can request information if you're filing a grievance for yourself. So,
That's tough though, because you're already going to get a statement from yourself. You don't have to ask yourself for a statement, so you're kind of shot down right there. But
yeah,
it's always better to get a steward involved or call your regional office, make sure you're covered, because you don't want
yeah,
a grievance thrown out based on representation.
yeah.
How about this? Publications can't be grieved, but can they be cited in a grievance? Can publications be grieved?
Well, you got the Postal Service Policy on Workplace Harassment that has incorporated in that publication 552.
Right.
But any kind of handbook, manual provision, I'm
Article
going to,
19.
yeah, I'm going to cite under Article 19. EL handbooks, I cite those, you know, when you talk about Supervisor's Guide to Handling Grievances. But you can obviously cite those in your contentions. If you're not going to make it an issue, you can put them in your contentions, and there's nothing wrong with that.
But
Absolutely.
again, I
I
think
want to address.
Article 19 does provide that bridge to you, I believe. Okay, James.
I want to address one question that I seen pop up here in the chat was about if someone doesn't want to give a grievance for, give a statement for something that has happened. They ask, can they write a statement and grieve it? Yes. Well, I would think that ideally, in every single instance, even if the person was not the target of management's actions or it happened to them directly, indirectly, we would want witness statements explaining as to how that behavior made you feel. All right. How it created a hostile work environment for you. For example, if there was someone, if management was standing there cursing another carrier out or grabbed them, did that make you feel afraid? Did that make you feel uncomfortable about working in that environment? So if someone is reluctant in giving a statement, collectively, we can obtain statements and or get or interview other carriers, clerks, or whoever that witnessed or was in earshot of something, and they can explain how that is, in fact, in their statement, created a hostile work environment for them. And we can then proceed as well. That's not the most ideal situation, but it's certain in any instance. If management wants to act like they just got no kind of act right at all, we're not going to give them a pass. We're not giving them a pass. You know, we're going to address the issue. So, but ideally, you want it to be with everybody, and particularly with the individual or individuals that were directly affected. But we still need that second line of defense with those that are impacted in a adverse way by being made to feel uncomfortable or feeling like their safety is in jeopardy.
Yeah. When you get James saying that management has no act right, that's as close as you're going to get to him cursing as there is. When he says you ain't got no act right, that's James actually cursing, and so that's as close as you're going to get. That's as close as you're going to get from him.
I think I've heard him yell out biscuits one time. So here's another question, Corey. So when a postmaster is the one that harassed the carrier, who should you submit the victim statement to and file a grievance through?
Say that again.
If the postmaster is the one that harassed the carrier, if there's nobody in the office that you can go above to file a grievance, how would you proceed with a grievance in that case?
You don't have a supervisor? You file it with the supervisor, right?
Yeah, I
They're
mean,
saying that,
even if the postmaster is the one who harassed you, you file it with the supervisor, and they
yeah,
have to move it up. It'll go to labor, it goes wherever it wants to, but you file with
yeah,
your immediate supervisor.
yeah. I mean, obviously, Article 15 is clear in that. You know, you got to file it within 14 days of that immediate supervisor. And so if it's him, it's just him. He's going to deny it. But yeah, I mean, that's who you file it with. And then if he's going to be the formal A for it, then just appeal it to him and then, meet with him again. And
Yeah.
that will look even better in arbitration because, this individual was, his own jury and executioner. And to me, that's a great for us when we go to arbitration because he's not going to rule against himself.
And there are a bunch of regional cases that support that too, brother. Another question, someone's asking, a couple of questions have come up. Can we get a grievance starter for something like this? So these slides kind of almost provide a grievance starter, don't they? I would say, I mean, we've got the issue statement here, we've got a remedy here. We could glue something together for our brothers and sisters, I think, and get a grievance starter together.
Yeah, and also you talked about those episodes on the JSOV on from 8 arbitration, 60 to 63. I can't remember what you said, but that does have a case file in there that will have the issue statement, how they did the issue statement, the contractual language. You can copy that. Just make sure that you amend it, that you don't leave things in there from Nashville, and you can use that. All the contractual language is already printed off. Contention's already there, how it applies. But yeah, we should be able to, and that's one of the things that when we take over, Paul's going to be over is these grievance starters.
Oh, don't get me
When you
started on that, brother. They are so,
whatever,
we don't have grievance starters for half the things that are affecting our carriers right now on the workroom floor. It's,
well, that's where you come into play, Paul, and that's why we love you so much. But yeah, those like 1 hour office time, whiteboards, all these things, instantly we'll have something to put out on the floor, even if it's not happening at your station, so that you're educated and you're ready to go for that. But yes, JSOV, all the contractual
stationary
language and
events,
stuff.
all that stuff that hasn't been addressed, we're going to be addressing.
Yeah,
So, I think that's pretty much all the questions I see, unless there are some in the chat.
I know Badmouth had a question, had his hand raised. Is he still here?
I did see something he posted where, when we go in, it's going to be like, I'm your Huckleberry now. Just
But
like,
I
just
saw he
like
had
Peter
his
Pan.
hand raised though. Is he still on?
I don't,
Yeah, I'm here. I think brother Henry more or less covered it. I was bringing up grieving, making statements and filing grievances on your brother and sister's family's behalf. I know we down here in Fort Worth, it took over a year of little petty grievances, JSOV grievances against a dog shit manager. And what ended up happening was I ended up starting to grieve on the other CCA's behalf and writing statements on the other CCA's behalf, basically saying like, hey, the way this manager talks to my friend over here is making it really hard for me to focus on my case. It's making me, you guys already went over the whole thing where you want specifics, but you also want to talk about how it makes you feel in a statement. But
Yeah.
because we had CCAs who were getting run roughshod by this monster, they were too scared to write shit. So I started writing shit on their behalf, and that gave them kind of the gumption moving along to start writing statements too. And it was actually the CCAs in that station and their statements that got my steward at the time gave him enough ammunition to remove that fucking bastard. Not the carriers who complained every day but wouldn't file a grievance, but the CCAs rose up as one and got rid of her. So I just wanted and I was filing 1767s when I saw that they were having our CCAs drive their personal vehicles out because, hey, that's a safety issue, right? Like what does their personal insurance cover their vehicles and shit, right? So if you're in an office and people aren't trying to write shit, find that one person who will be your Huckleberry in there and write shit on everyone else's behalf. Because we can, with a creative thinking, we can make this shit safety issues, and we can also make this shit, if they're bullying this person over here, that makes my day worse. So I'm gonna file that grievance, right? So rise as one and fucking cut their legs out from underneath them. Love you guys.
yeah, and you bring up a good point too, Badmouth, that we're looking at contractual violations, right? So if I see Corey Walton or Badmouth Moores being harassed, I can file because of what I saw. I can file that the contract was violated by the way he talked to you, even if the carrier doesn't want to say a thing. If they're too afraid to speak up and I saw it happen, I can file that grievance. It doesn't have to be just how I feel. It can be on what that supervisor did to that carrier who's too afraid. And once that carrier gets brought in, they might actually write a statement at that point, knowing that somebody else has their back. So you're right. If you see a carrier who's too afraid and you're the one that can stand up for them, you do it. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, you know that I've seen, Paul, I've seen bad mouth on probably 50 Zooms. He's never sitting down. He's
Yeah,
always
that
walking
guy's
around.
full of energy, man. He is full of energy.
He's always walking around in circles. I lose weight by watching him on Zoom because he's always walking around. The man is full of passion, though. I'll give you that. One of the things that we can do, they do hold some weight, are the surveys. If people are so scared that when we send teams in, we'll have a survey, we'll bring them in maybe 5 at a time and do surveys. Those carry some weight if they're signed. When you have a station that is so terrified that they don't want to write a statement, but they may do a survey. And so those are other options for us. Like I said, I'd much rather have a good written statement, signed, dated. But surveys, we've done that before, where you have a survey. JB has got a very good one on toxic working environment, where it talks about, list out the things. And carriers sometimes, when it's not as intimidating as just writing a statement on my manager, what he said, is just, filling out this survey for us. Everybody's doing it, so they don't feel alone. But those are some of the things we can do. Like I said, they carry some weight in arbitration.
Yeah. So Chris Jackson just piped in here and he said he wanted to let the parties know that an EEO is part of their grievance settlement. So you can actually, through the JCAM, include an EEO into dual filing. So I'm not sure if there was a question asked that I missed about EEOs. Yeah, there was. Yeah, what significance is there of checking an EEO box on an 8190? So if the harassment does include some kind of an EEO, like sexual harassment or gender harassment, check that box off. That's a good point because you can also do a dual filing. Very good point.
Yeah, and it shows that I know JB's dealing with one right now, out at one of his stations, that we're doing everything humanly possible to get this manager under control. We're using every resource available to us to do that. When we talk about IMIP, EEO, all these different avenues, we're doing everything humanly possible, police reports, to get this matter under control. The only ones who are fighting for the letter carrier is our union. Management's refusing to intervene. So we're having to go through all these different things to try to get help. And that's like James keeps talking about, casting that wide net.
Yeah, and that's a hell of a closing statement for an arbitration, isn't it, Corey? If you were in front of an arbitrator, listen, the police have tried, the district managers tried, EEO has tried, the stewards have tried, the branch presidents tried, his own postmasters tried. We're here because you're the last stop.
Yeah.
Nobody's been able to
Well,
stop this man.
informal ace settlements, they say they're not precedent setting, but it shows both parties have attempted to curb this behavior. Formal ace settlements, both parties have attempted to curb this behavior. DRT, both parties have attempted to curb this behavior. The ultimate ruler, an arbitrator, has attempted. District managers, IMIP, all these people come in. This person is not listening. They're just not listening. They're not leading. They've got 50 training classes on all these DRT decisions that they've gone to. Nothing is helping. The only thing that's going to help, Mr. Arbitrator, is you. You are all we have. And so we want them removed from supervising city letter carriers. They're not listening to anybody, but they'll listen to that. Once they're removed from supervising city letter carriers, it's somebody else's burden. So yeah, that's right.
So I think that wraps up our questions, Corey. We just hit the 2-hour mark. So I want to thank everybody for joining us. I want to hand this over for James to close us up for the training, but I want to thank you all, especially on a Sunday, for taking your time to learn with Corey and I and James. And we're going to keep doing this for you, but there's nothing more important than protecting our carriers on the workroom floor, and that's what we need to do. So I hope you picked up something here. This is all going to be available material for you. And we are really happy to be here with you today. James, what do you got for us, brother? Is James here?
He said he was traveling.
No, he might be gone, and I guess it's you and me, Corey. All right, so Corey and I would like to thank you, brothers and sisters, And I guess we're going to wrap this up and say that we will see you next time for our next training. But please remember to click share and follow the CLC if you've approved of this training. We're trying our best to get out there and help our brothers and sisters, but we need you to have our backs. So we can't do anything unless we get voted in 2027. So we need you to make this happen for us and for you. So with that, I want to thank you all, and I want you to have a great Sunday afternoon. Go out and have a dinner. You earned it.
Recording